everybody. Hope your holidays have been outstanding. Welcome to More Sports and Less Levine, the Weekend Winners Edition, a special Year in Review edition. I'm Dave Bacon. Over the course of the next 30 or so minutes, we're going to sit here and take a look at the year in review for the Browns, the Cavs, and the Indians with beat reporters from here at cleveland.com. When we talk Browns, we always talk Browns with Dan Labbe, Browns beat reporter here on cleveland.com, as well as in the pages of the Plain Dealer. Dan, Browns fans obviously disappointed, myself included, but if you'd have told Browns fans and me at the beginning of the year, Week 17, you're going to play the Steelers, you're going to have 10 wins, and if you beat them, you're in the playoffs. Everybody takes that, correct?
Right, especially if you would have told them that after that loss to Baltimore. If you would have said, hey, listen, don't worry about it. Just wait till the new year. You're going to be right there with a chance to win and get in against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who might not even be playing their starters against the Browns on Sunday. I think Browns fans would take that every single day of the week. It's just, in this case, it comes with that disappointment of what happened against the Jets. But this is what you want, a win to get into the playoffs at First Energy Stadium against the team that has tormented you for years and years and years. This is a great opportunity for the Browns.
The other thing is it could be the first of two back-to-back. There's a pretty likely scenario where if the Browns win to get in, they may face the Steelers in the first week of the playoffs. Want to touch briefly on the Jets game. Were you surprised at all that, the guys that kind of led the team in snaps were the two replacement wide receivers, Bradley and Hall? It was almost like they didn't alter the game plan, and it might have been because it was, not only the 11th hour, it was pretty close to the 12th hour that they had to adjust on the fly.
Yeah, they kind of find out about this right as they're finally able to board the plane at 7 o'clock at night on Saturday. They're running a walkthrough in a parking garage on Sunday morning. But, I was a little disappointed that we didn't see some sort of adjustment to the game plan. I understand there's some things you can't do, and you still have guys on the field playing who have spent the week in this game plan that you came up with, and you don't want to upend everything. But at the same time, I think this team has some bread and butter stuff that they can do, and it kind of starts with running the football with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. I know the Jets have a good run defense, but, I would have liked to have seen them maybe attack on the ground just a little bit more instead of relying on guys like Derek Willis and Jamarcus Bradley, Marvin Hall, guys that we just haven't seen on the field much this year.
Is it fair to say it's a disappointment that game, I feel, doesn't matter. That's a game you should find a way to win if you're a playoff team.
I kind of agree, just because, and I think I tweeted this before the game. If you drafted skill position guys, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends in that game, there would still be a number of picks before you even picked a Jet. You'd probably pick 3 or 4 Browns offensive players who were playing in that game over any Jets skill position player. So, yeah, I think that's a game, especially because we saw in the second half the Browns rallied and almost pulled that game off. That tells me that this team still should have been able to beat the Jets.
Last thought I'll put out on that game, Cody Parkey's got to start making extra points. I mean, that killed him. It's being overlooked, but, they completely alter the way they attack that last series where Mayfield fumbled. If a field goal can tie it and send it to overtime.
And look, starting this week, you're kind of one and done at this point. I know there are scenarios where they could lose on Sunday and still get in, but at some point, if you really believe you can get to that divisional round or even get to the AFC Championship game, you're going to have to rely on Cody Parkey to go out there and make a kick. And based on his history and based on what we've seen lately, I don't think anyone can honestly say they feel comfortable about that.
All right, now let's get on to the good stuff. When you look back at this year, what's the most important thing that happened for the Browns in 2020?
I think it's hiring the guy we were actually just a little bit critical of, Kevin Stefanski. Finding a guy that understood how important it was to come in and set a culture, a guy that understands, his personnel and how to fit that personnel together and make it effective, a guy that seems to have, after a rough start to the season, rescued Baker Mayfield and who just seems unflappable, completely unfazed by anything. And I think that's so important for a Browns coach, especially in that first year, because so much can happen within this organization. And you lose a game here or there, and it can just torpedo a season. And Kevin Stefanski seems to be the right guy to sort of lead this team and build this team up into what they want to be in the next year or two. And that's, AFC North contenders and Super Bowl contenders.
The other thing that you have to go that goes hand in hand with that is it certainly looks like they got the guy making personnel decisions right as well, and Andrew Berry.
Yeah, he had a really good draft, it looks like. And it's still incomplete. We haven't seen Grant Delpit yet. And you look at some of the guys down the line, some have produced, some have been a little up and down, but that's okay. I mean, Donovan Peoples-Jones, if he turns into anything, that's an absolute steal late in the draft. He had a good free agency. He seems to know how to attack and build this roster. And, moving into the new year, I'm excited to see what he'll do on the defensive side of the football after he really rebuilt this offense in the offseason. So it looks like you have two guys that understand how to work together and how to build this thing together and are on the same page. And for the Browns, that is an enormous step forward.
The other thing about it is it appears they got that pick of the left tackle correct in Jedrick Wills as well. That's huge. I mean, he was not there last week, and it was a noticeable absence, as they say.
We talk about Wyatt Teller a lot and how important he is to the run game, but I think Jedrick Wills is just as important. He really hit the ground running. There haven't been a lot of hiccups with him, and you kind of expect it. I was even warning, don't expect this guy to step on the field and be Joe Thomas. Now, he hasn't been Joe Thomas. We're talking about a Hall of Famer, but he's been really good from the start, and there just haven't been many situations where you look out there and say, oh boy, I'm a little worried about Jedrick Wills. He has stabilized that left tackle position. And he's a big reason that the rest of that offensive line, along with Jack Conklin on the other side, has really been the strength of this offense and allowed Baker Mayfield and this running game to floor it.
What about the way you have seen young guys develop, Baker Mayfield in particular? And keep in mind, there was no training camp to speak of. The off-season things weren't there. I'm really curious and somewhat excited to see if things get back to normal, how Kevin Stefanski in this, front office develops guys just based on, the bye week. Look at the difference in Baker Mayfield from the bye week forward.
Right, and it's sort of you're gonna have an opportunity to do something this organization never has a chance to do, and that's go from a basic understanding of a scheme and a system to like starting to work towards that graduate level. That's what a full offseason and a second year together can do. But as far as what's happened with Baker this year, you go back to the first Pittsburgh game. It was an absolute disaster through 2 picks. He had thrown 2 picks against the Colts in the second half the week before. He throws a pick on his first throw against Cincinnati. And then something clicks, something changes, and all of a sudden he has a great game against a really bad Bengals team. The weather turns. He has to be a little bit of a game manager. I just think the way they've rebuilt Baker kind of through all of that and turned him into a guy that isn't loose with the football. Now, again, Sunday, look, I think Sunday was an exception to a lot of things. He fumbled the ball a number of times. That was a problem. But he's not throwing interceptions. He's willing to throw the football away. And we're seeing these incremental steps from Baker that, look, halfway through the season, we're talking about, are they going to pick up that 5th-year option? To now we're talking about, yeah, they're definitely going to pick that up, you would think. And maybe they start talking extension this offseason. So it's been sort of a fast uphill for Baker here over the last 2 months.
And I think you have to look at turnovers. Not all turnovers are created equal. The ones against the Jets, they came at a time when he was put in a situation where he had to try to make a play, in part because the offense wasn't working and they missed that extra point. Just killed them.
Yeah, and sometimes when you're in that situation, you're just trying to do too much. And I think there were situations where that was the case with Baker. Now the quarterback sneak, that's inexcusable. You can't do that. But when you're that last strip sack, he's looking for something downfield. He's trying to make a play for this football team. Again, I think Sunday was just an exception to a lot of things the Browns have been doing this year. I think when all is said and done, especially if they beat Pittsburgh on Sunday, we're not even going to remember that Jets game.
Yeah, well, the Browns certainly would like to forget about it. The other thing about the 4th down thing is, again, Parkey makes the extra point. They're lining up to kick a field goal to send it to overtime. That doesn't even enter into it. We talked a little bit about the draft class. It certainly looks like they targeted the right guys in free agent, and it was methodical. There was a method, and we saw it early, and it's played out on the field. Guys that fit what they wanted to do.
It's really funny to look back at the offseason, and you could just identify, like if you sat down and you looked at the roster and you said, okay, I would address this position and this position, maybe even this guy. The Browns kind of followed that formula. That's not to say that any fan could have done it. What I mean is just it all made sense, right? They knew to shore up the tackle position. So they addressed right tackle in free agency and used the number 10 pick on a left tackle. had a head coach who loves heavy personnel, so they trade for a fullback. They go out and sign the best tight end on the market. Now, Austin Hooper maybe hasn't lived up to that contract yet, but there's still some years left, and there's time for him and Baker to get on the same page. They just attacked this thing. It all made sense. They were building what this coach wanted out of his offense. They were shoring up the obvious holes that they had. Defensively, they I don't want to say they ignored that side of the ball because they did go out and draft Grant Delpit, but I think we'll see a similar approach where we're going to be able to sit down and say, here's what they need on defense. And I think a lot of that stuff is going to align as this next offseason moves forward.
Yeah, that kind of leads me into what do you see? Obviously, it's defense. What do you see the need being? It certainly looks like they need guys that can run and tackle in the middle of that field. And Delpit may be one of them. Delpit may be one of them.
Yeah, I think Delpit is going to be really important. I think he was going to be really important to this defense. And, sort of a blessing in disguise, his injury made them go out and get Ronnie Harrison because they needed that multiple guy at safety. So now maybe they have their future kind of back end of the defense moving forward in those two young guys. But, I don't know if this front office agrees with this, but I really would love to see them go out and attack the linebacker position. Go get a guy that can be that sideline to sideline kind of thumper, run stopper, can cover. The rest of the division still seems to value that linebacker position. I would love to see the Browns value that this offseason and just go find a guy that can dominate in the middle of the field. And then you've got to add depth in the secondary. If you feel good with those two guys at safety, now go out and add some more depth at corner because you just don't know what you have outside of Denzel Ward.
Yeah, that's another one. We tend to forget Greedy Williams is a guy that showed some promise at times, was a little uneven rookie year. He hadn't been on the field at all. You tend to overlook that, but that could be another guy that fits into this piece.
Yeah, you hope so, but the problem is, this was just a lost year for Greedy.
Yeah.
I think this was going to be a year. You came out of his rookie year feeling good about some things, but not entirely sure. They were going to give him that opportunity to be the second corner. It's not really a position they addressed in the offseason, so it was going to be his job really to lose. And then he just got hurt, and this becomes a lost season for him. And look, if you view yourself as a division contender, as a potential Super Bowl contender as soon as next year, and this roster is getting priced to the point where you have to start thinking like that, you can't just write Greedy Williams in pen and say, all right, let's go. You kind of just have to look at it and say, whatever we get out of Greedy moving forward, that's a bonus because you just don't know what he is right now.
When you look back at the 2020 season, is it a success regardless? I mean, a lot of people were saying 500 would be a success. 10 wins, if you get 10 wins and you don't make the playoffs, that's going to sting a lot. How do you grade this? Is this, when you look at the Browns season, what do you think?
I hate to be flippant with opportunities because we know that in the NFL things can change because of injury. Sometimes the schedule is just bad one year to the next. But I'll be honest, to me, this season, regardless of what happens on Sunday against Pittsburgh, is a success. If they go 10-6 and miss the playoffs, even if they go 11-5 and everything goes against them and they end up missing the playoffs, however that would play out. Well, I guess that can't happen now. But if they go 10-6 and they miss the playoffs, I still look at this as a success because you have the pieces in place. You have the building blocks in place. This isn't 2007 where it all just felt like a mirage. And you didn't know about Derek Anderson. You maybe didn't trust Romeo Crennel and Phil Savage. I think you feel really good about everything you have moving forward right now with this roster, with this coaching staff, with this GM. I think regardless of what happens, this season has been a success.
Gut feeling, do you think they get into the playoffs? And I know it's way too early to ask you about the matchup. Do you think they find a way to get in?
I do. I think this team has been so resilient all season long, and I think this last week was sort of a kick for them. They felt like they had that opportunity, and maybe it got taken away from them a little bit when they had to lose those 4 receivers at 7:00 at night on Saturday. I think this is a resilient football team. I think they have what it takes to go beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. However that looks, whether it's the Steelers starters, whether it's their backups, whoever, I think they're a resilient group that's going to be ready for this football game and is going to go out and win on Sunday and finish what they started that they weren't able to do against the Jets. And again, I feel like maybe a part of them feels like that opportunity was taken away from them.
Last thing I'll ask you, when you look at the roster from where it was a year ago to where it sits right now, how dramatic is the is the improvement? And what do you think going forward? Who deserves the credit for that?
It's funny, for all the turnover and all the regime changes, this roster is kind of built over, you had the Sashi Brown regime that obviously was controversial, but if nothing else, they went out and acquired a bunch of draft assets, handed them over to John Dorsey. John Dorsey didn't do everything right, but he added talent as well. A lot of the guys we talked about today came in through John Dorsey using Sashi Brown's draft picks. And then Andrew Berry is kind of fine-tuning this roster a little bit. So, as crazy as it's been kind of going back to 2016, you can kind of look at all this stuff and see that, from Sashi Brown collecting those draft assets to John Dorsey using them to Andrew Berry finishing the roster. I don't know if one specific guy actually gets credit for this. I think it's just been across the board, adding talent, finally finding the right guy to coach this football team. And now the job gets really hard, because now you've got to finish this roster, and now you've got to take it to that level where it can, like I've said a couple times, win the North and potentially win a Super Bowl.
I lied. I got a couple more. I've
got no place to be.
So when you look at Andrew Berry, I think it's even more impressive because he didn't feel like he had to, rip everything out that wasn't his. He kind of tweaked it, and I think that speaks volumes because that's the task at hand. It's not like you have to pull the engine out of this. You got to throw some tires on it, find something in the middle of the thing that'll make it work defensively, and tweak it more.
And that's sort of one of the things we haven't talked about a lot. But this coaching staff and this front office, like you said, they didn't look at this roster and say, well, that's not my guy, and that's not my guy. Obviously, you're not going to say that with a guy like Myles Garrett, and you're not going to say that with a guy like Denzel Ward or even a Jarvis Landry, Odell Beckham. I mean, those guys are uber talented players. But even some of the smaller pieces that we always see turnover, we didn't see any of that. Well, that's not my guy, so I don't want him. Whoever's in that building, they work with, they develop, they coach up. And that's really kind of why this has worked. So whether it's a guy that Sashi picked or Dorsey picked or Andrew Berry picked, the job is the same. If that guy's in the building, develop him, coach him up, get him to a point where he can help you win football games.
We hear the dog pound barking behind you, so that's always a good sign. Last thing, promise this time. We haven't heard much from Jimmy and Dee Haslam. I think that's a sign that they finally feel comfortable that they got that right in that building.
Yeah, and I think the more important thing is we haven't heard people calling to hear from them. I think every year, right around the middle of the season, it's like, why haven't we heard from ownership yet? I don't think people want to hear from ownership right now. I think the Haslams have done a really good job, and they admitted back in training camp that they didn't feel the organization managed expectations well in 2019, and they've done a good job of staying kind of in the background. J.W. Johnson will tweet every now and again, but it's nothing out of the ordinary. They've just let this thing play out, and I think they, sort of like the whole organization, felt burnt by what happened in 2019 and understood you've just got to let this thing work. You've got to let it play out, and there's no point in taking victory laps before you've done anything. And I really think that's been the approach this year.
Dan Labbe, Browns beat reporter here on cleveland.com, as well as in the pages of the Plain Dealer. Appreciate the time, as always. I'm sure we'll be checking back in, maybe talking a little bit about that Steelers matchup a little bit later in the week.
All right, absolutely.
Thanks, Dan. Well, on the other side of the break, we flip teams. We will be joined by Chris Fedor talking Cavs basketball, one of a handful of the last unbeaten teams in the NBA. More sports and less Levine. The Year in Review edition. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Presque Isle Downs and Casino has sports betting. Use one of our 50 state-of-the-art Bet America kiosks to place your bet and watch your favorite games on one of our many HD televisions, or visit our sportsbook area. Only at Presque Isle Downs and Casino.
Do you like Ohio State football? Would you like to get information from me, Doug Lesmerises, about Ohio State football without having to look at my face? We have got the plan for you. Become an Ohio State text subscriber through cleveland.com. You send a text, 614-350-3315. What do you get? 2, 3, 4 texts right in your phone every day about Ohio State football. Inside information, polls, voting, all kinds of things. You can be on our podcast. We take tech subscriber questions on our Buckeye Talk podcast every week. If you really want to be involved with Ohio State football, in season or out of season, become an Ohio State tech subscriber from cleveland.com. Send a text to 614-350-3315. 14-day free trial. What do you have to lose? $3.99 a month after that. 614-350-3315. I'll see you in your phone.
Tri-C is here for you. Now more than ever, you need a post-secondary education. So I encourage you to start your journey here at Tri-C. The majority of fall classes will take place online, but we've added a variety of formats to meet your learning needs, and we've taken many steps to keep you safe on campus. Whether you're ready to get started or your four-year plans have changed, Tri-C is where futures begin.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. Welcome back to More Sports and Less Levine, Weekend Winners Edition, a special year in review edition. Time to flip the script from the Browns to the Cavs. Cleveland, one of the teams that remains the final unbeaten as they get underway with a very young team. When we talk Cavs basketball, we always talk to Chris Fedor, Cavs beat reporter here on cleveland.com, as well as in the pages of the Plain Dealer. Chris, appreciate it. Young guys playing really well has to be a good sign for the Cavs front office and coaching staff.
Yeah, for sure, Dave. I mean, I think if you make a list of goals of what the Cavs want to achieve throughout the course of this season, sure, everybody has talked about playoffs, right? They've talked about making the play-in tournament and how that is actually considered making the playoffs. But I think there's a recognition of, even if the Cavs don't achieve that particular goal, there are little ones along the way that can allow this to be a successful season. And one of the things is exactly what you alluded to. It's the growth of the young players. The Cavs have been using the phrase internal growth. Darius Garland, Colin Sexton, Dylan Windler, if he can recover from this hand fracture. You know, these guys are such big parts, Dave, of the future of this organization. And if they can start making big strides here in year 2, year 3, whatever the case is for each individual player, even if the Cavs don't win a ton of games, it can be a successful season because it can set the organization up for future success. And really, that's what it's all about.
When it happened last year, I was a little upset that the Cavs were one of several teams that did not make that Orlando bubble and the restart. How much does that set a team like the Cavs that are so young that every single game experience you get for some of those guys is a growing process? And I know the Cavs aren't going to worry about it, but as people that follow them and cover them, that's got to be something that is it's an impediment to developing like we had talked they want to.
No, they were ticked, Dave. They definitely were worried about it. And they talked about it going into opening night this year, just about taking 9 months of frustration and disappointment out on the other team that they were going to play against. And in the opener, it was the Charlotte Hornets. So it's not something that they have forgotten. It's something that they're using as motivation. And they feel like they did miss out on huge developmental opportunity for a lot of their young guys. They feel like they missed out on an opportunity for JP Bickerstaff to continue to instill his culture and his systems offensively and defensively. And they feel like they missed out on an opportunity to get Andre Drummond more acclimated to Cleveland and to his new teammates. If you remember, Dave, they traded for Andre on February 6th with the thought of, hey, we're going to get like 2 months, however many games with Andre, and they only got less than 10. They got 8 total games with him. That's not a lot for a significant piece that sometimes is very, very hard to fit into an organization. So they lost out on all of that And because of that, the Cavs do feel like they were at a disadvantage compared to all these other teams that were able to go down to Disney for the bubble. It's amazing to me, Dave, honestly, that they've been able to get off to the start that they've gotten off to, considering that. And I think that's a testament to JB Bickerstaff and the rest of the organization for their preparation, their attention to detail, and the way that they navigated an unprecedented offseason.
You mentioned J.B. Bickerstaff, a young head coach, comes from a coaching bloodline. Bernie, his father, a really, really good NBA coach. What have you seen from him? What makes you think this is the guy that is the right guy for the Cavs?
I think it boils down to this, Dave. He communicates with these guys in a way that makes them want to follow. They believe in him. They trust in him. He's simplified things on defense with these schemes that he's put into place, and he's made the offense more pass first, more team oriented, and all those things are great, and you can't take any of that away from him. But the biggest complication I feel over the last couple of years with John Beilein and then with Ty Lue before that is just the kind of team that it was, the kind of coach that they had, and the gap between all of those elements. I don't want to say ancillary elements because they're so important, but it's about managing personalities, and it's about communication, and those things were lacking, especially with John Beilein last year. There was just a gap, and the players didn't trust in him. They didn't believe in him. They believe in JB Bickerstaff because he treats them like men, right? Because he can communicate with a 20-year-old just the same way that he can communicate with a 32-year-old. And because he's been around the NBA and he knows what it takes. So that, to me, has been, based on all of my conversations with players and people inside the organization, the thing that has set JB apart beyond just the schemes that are obviously better for this group of players.
You mentioned Andre Drummond. Is he here long term? He's got a big number. He opted in, a huge contract number for this year. He's certainly a piece that a good team would want. Do you think there's a future, a long-term future here in Cleveland, or are they more likely to trade and try to see what they can get at the trade deadline?
I think this is tricky for a couple of reasons, Dave. One, because the 2021 free agency class that a lot of teams were loading up for and they were hoarding cap space for has really thinned out because a lot of these guys have agreed to contract extensions, including the guy who was supposed to be the biggest fish in the pond, and that's Giannis. So there are a lot of teams that are going to have cap space and not a ton of players to spend on. Because of that, even though he's a center, even though in NBA terms, Dave, he's more of a quote-unquote dinosaur, I think there's going to be a stronger market for Andre Drummond this offseason. If that's the case, then I think it's more likely for him to leave in free agency, or the Cavs getting wind of that possibility and trying to flip him at the deadline for assets. I think they would bring him back long term, absolutely. They've had conversations with Andre's representation about that possibility. But what the Cavs are willing to offer financially and what Andre feels like he's worth and his representation feels like he's worth, there's a big gap there. And unless that significantly closes, I find it hard to believe that the Cavs in this kind of situation that they're in, still in a rebuild, even though they've won some games here early on in the season, still in a rebuild, that they commit the kind of money that it may take to keep Andre from hitting free agency and going to a situation that may be better. In saying all of that, Andre really likes it here in Cleveland. He's talked about being reborn here and having an opportunity to grow with this team and rewrite the narrative that surrounds this franchise, and he does want to be a part of that.
You mentioned center's kind of dinosaur, but boy, he's kind of a double-double waiting to happen, especially with a team that can shoot from the outside a little bit like the Cavs can. Let's talk a little bit about those guards. What have you seen, especially Garland? And I know, Garland's an interesting guy. Had his rookie season cut short because of that. Had his college career really cut short, played like 5 or 6 games. So this guy is just kind of a baby in terms of games played at high levels.
Dave, he is a completely different person here in year 2. And it's funny because a lot of the players were saying, hey, look out for Darius in year 2. We saw him at the mini bubble, right? We've seen him here in training camp. He's a different person. He's going to be playing a huge role for us, and he's ready for it. Now, the initial reaction is, hold on here. This is training camp fluff, right? This is just the optimism that floods a team at this time of year. But in the first couple of games, Darius has looked like a completely different player. His turnovers are down. His assists are up. This offense seems to fit his skill set really, really well because J.B. Bickerstaff has given him a lot of freedom. Everybody is touching the ball. They're working the ball into Andre, Larry Nance Jr., Kevin Love, and the guards are able to play off of those guys away from the ball, become finishers and distributors, as opposed to just distributors and guys who have to go create their own offense at the snap of a finger. So I've been really impressed with Darius Garland. Dave, the numbers last year pointed to him, and this isn't my opinion, this is the numbers, and you can take numbers for what they are, but the numbers pointed to him being the worst player in the entire NBA. Not the worst rookie, right? Not the worst point guard, the worst player. And so far this year, he has been integral in the way that the Cavs have moved the ball offensively and have lifted themselves into a category where they have been one of the best offenses in the entire NBA. And without Darius and his contributions and his floor generalship and all the other things that he worked on in this long offseason, the Cavs wouldn't be that.
You look over at Sexton, and since the time J.B. Bickerstaff has taken over as head coach, he's taken off. He's been pretty much what they had hoped he would be end of last year under Bickerstaff, and then again starting this year. He's a guy that can score.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, if you think about what he did after the Jordan Clarkson trade on December 23rd, Dave, he became one of the elite scorers in the entire Eastern Conference, right? He was in the conversation. His numbers put him in the conversation with Chris Middleton and Jimmy Butler and those kinds of guys. And he's picked up on that. Like, 9 months didn't slow down Colin Sexton, which is absolutely incredible. You would think that the long extended break would have interrupted the flow that he was in, which was absolutely unbelievable in March, where he was averaging 30 a game. You'd think that would have slowed him down. It didn't. Shooting 59% from the field, around 27 points per game. He's just been absolutely incredible early on in the season, and he makes scoring look easy. It's not something that he's forcing, Dave. I think that's a big point to be made here when you look at Colin Sexton year 1 to year 2, then year 2 to year 3. It's all coming in the flow of the offense. He's trying to make the right decisions. He's trying to make the right plays. And in doing that, he's also scoring the basketball at a really high efficient clip. And if he continues to do that, I don't think the criticisms that people have attached to him in his first 2 years will continue. Which I thought were a little bit ridiculous to begin with, because people were poo-pooing a 20-year-old kid who was scoring 20 a night like it's supposed to be easy or something along those lines. Colin Sexton has shown he can play. Maybe we don't know exactly what his ceiling is or what his actual role is going to be into the future, but we know he can play, and we know he's one of the most lethal scorers in the Eastern Conference. It has now been 3-4 months of that level of play. I think that's enough sample size to say that about him.
Last thing I'll ask you about, Isaac Okoro, the guy the Cavs picked 5 in the draft, was said to be a great perimeter defender. We've seen that. His offense was questioned. It's looked like it's been a little bit better than some of those scouting reports had it.
It has, and if that offense continues that same kind of way, Dave, and he continues to knock down outside shots and look confident, at least shooting the ball from the outside, then suddenly the Cavs have that two-way wing that is so difficult to find in the NBA and so necessary to consistently win games. And if Isaac Okoro would have played offense at Auburn the way that he did in the preseason for the Cavs, he wouldn't have been there at number 5 for the Cavs. I can tell you that much. But he was, and lucky for them, and they love him. And I think the thing that stands out to me the most, Dave, is the fact that he can impact games in a variety of ways. So let's go back to that Detroit game, the double overtime win. Isaac scores 0 points. He misses every single shot that he takes. And he was the second most impactful player in that game based on plus minus because of all of the other things that he did. The little things that sometimes don't always show up in box scores, but contribute a big, big way to winning. And that's what everybody that I talked to leading into the draft said about Isaac. He is a winner. We don't know how to define that. We don't know exactly how to measure that, but he is going to make the Cleveland Cavaliers better. He made the starting lineup better when he got into it. He's made the defense better. He just makes them a better basketball team. Even at 19 years old, you can see that kind of impact. And I think it makes you really, really excited about his future and what he's going to continue to become, because he's already one of the hardest workers on the team.
Chris, before I let you go, last thing we'll look at, we got to give some credit to Kobe Altman. Didn't have a lot of luck the way the lottery ball was bouncing the last couple of years, but he ends up with Sexton at 8, Garland at 5, and Okoro at 5. And right now, those 3 look like they can all play.
Is it allowed to give Kobe Altman credit? I don't know if that's allowed around these parts. Everybody has spent so many years just attacking him and criticizing him for the moves that he didn't make or the moves that he did that he shouldn't have made. I'm with you. I mean, I just think it's really, really hard to make a declaration on young players and a general manager that has built with young players, because it takes time. And everybody matures at a different rate. The rate for Colin Sexton's maturity is going to be different than Darius Garland, and it's going to be different than Kevin Porter Jr. and Dylan Windler and all these different guys. And it goes for the entire NBA, Dave. You know that. So that's why, for me, I always tried to take a step back and evaluate Kobe Altman for the moves that he made and try and focus on those independent of the win-loss record. Because I never felt like Altman or the Cavs as a whole, Dave, were at a point where they were ready to be evaluated by their win-loss record. I always felt like they were only at a point where you could evaluate the individual. And if you look at what Kobe Altman has done, he has added draft picks. He has built what I think is a promising young core. And I think that young core is kind of showing that in the first portion of this season as well. You know, he added Andre Drummond, an all-star center, to help stabilize the defense, give this team a boost in talent. They gave up nothing to get that kind of guy. So yes, Kobe Altman has made mistakes. There's no doubt about that. You can talk about the Kyrie Irving trade. You can talk about some of these other ones. No general manager is perfect. But I think if we put it together as a whole, independent of the record for the Cavs, I think you'll see, honestly, that Kobe's moves have been better than people have been giving him credit for at this point in time.
I would agree. I mean, look at the young talent that they have to develop. Chris Fedor, Cavs beat reporter here on cleveland.com, as well as the pages of the Plain Dealer. As always, we appreciate your insight. I'm sure we'll be checking back in with you. Cavs off to an exciting start. Thanks a lot, Chris.
You got it.
All right, we're going to step aside, take a quick time out. On the other side of the break, we're a year in review with the Cleveland Indians. Indians beat reporter Joe Noga joins us. More sports and less Levine, Weekend Winners Edition, a special year in review edition. Straight ahead. Stay with us.
Shelley, our garage floor is just awful.
I know. We really need Nature Stone.
Cracks, uneven concrete, it's slippery.
I keep telling you, we need Nature Stone.
Coach, only Nature Stone solves all those problems. That's why it comes with Russell's Promise, our true unconditional warranty.
And Nature Stone is absolutely beautiful and so easy to clean.
Schedule today at naturestone.com and get up to half your garage floor free. Hurry, offer ends soon.
Herb, Nature Stone fixed every problem in our garage.
I told you.
It's not just a floor.
Wow, it's Nature Stone.
There are tastes we remember. Every smell brings the happiness of times gone by. Experience this every time you walk into Gallucci's Italian Foods. Whether you need lunch on the go, a catered party, or that perfect blend of wine, meats, and cheeses, Gallucci's has exactly what you're looking for. Straight from Mama's Kitchen for old world traditions or original experiences. From the tastes you remember to new flavors you'll never forget, Gallucci's is a tasty branch of your family tree.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just the mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
More sports and less Levine. The Weekend Winners Edition, a special Year in Review edition continues. Time to turn our attention to the Cleveland Indians. A lot of things going on in the offseason with the Indians. Santana, Brant Hand let go. Talk is that Francisco Lindor trade is not a question of if, rather when. Let's welcome in Indians beat reporter Joe Noga from cleveland.com, as well as the pages of the Plain Dealer. And Joe, the national guys seem to think it's a matter of when the trade will happen with Francisco Lindor. If that happens, I would assume you would say this is full rebuild mode for the Indians.
Yeah, it seems to be that way. You take a four-time All-Star and a bat out of the middle of your lineup. That had been, certainly one of the better hitters in the American League. You also lose a defensive shortstop who's a two-time Gold Glove winner. There are a lot more questions than answers right now. If a Lindor trade does happen, you've got questions at first base, in center field, actually in all three outfield positions. So offensively, this team, which made it to the playoffs despite being one of the worst hitting teams in baseball last season, it certainly looks like the trend is to go into rebuild mode at that point.
And you touched on it. Last year they were one of the worst teams in baseball, and you've taken away potentially the leadoff hitter in Hernandez, who's a free agent, Santana, who is your 3-4 hitter, signed with the Royals. You lost your closer. You allowed Hand to go, but I know that's you do have some young guys. I know because of the situation financially, it impacts teams like the Indians, the smaller market teams that do not have the big TV revenue. So let's frame it this way. The teams that have the large television revenue, the big market teams like the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Red Sox, they had a lot more income coming in because their TV revenue, they got a portion of it. Indians in the lower end did not. It was a financial nightmare, led to what they're doing. Having said that, gut feeling, do you think they trade Lindor? And if they do they get anything at all resembling what they might have gotten if they did it last year?
I think they did wait too long to get to this point to have to trade Lindor. I think they will trade him before opening day. I don't think they will get the haul of prospects or even Major League ready players that they got, let's say, in the Mike Clevenger deal even. It might be one or two position players, somebody as a stopgap at short, and a mid to high level prospect at that. Beyond that, it's not looking at what they're getting in terms of return for Lindor and like they did in the Corey Kluber trade, unloading the potential salary, the $20 million or near $20 million that Lindor is going to make in arbitration this year. And if they could package that possibly with $12 to $13 million on Carlos Carrasco's deal, get out from under that debt, they set themselves up financially a little better. Maybe they can bring back a Cesar Hernandez who had an outstanding season, a Gold Glove season, and hit really well at the top of the lineup last year. Maybe there's that flexibility there, but Cesar Hernandez isn't your permanent solution in the middle of the infield there. He's 1, maybe 2 years at that. It looks a lot like a rebuild right now when and if the Lindor trade happens.
The other thing that is happening is the franchise has announced they will move away from the Indians. And the timing of it is really interesting. You do that in a year where you're probably going to trade the face of your franchise, Francisco Lindor, and now you're also saying, by the way, we're going to be the Cleveland baseball team for a while till we figure out what we really want to call ourselves. There's a lot that's going on that's not great for building your fan base.
Right. It's a lot of opportunity for a fan base to turn their back on you if that's the case. It's a little different than what they did in Washington with the Washington football team. They're not going by an interim name during this upcoming season. They are going to play as the Indians this year and not be referred to as the Cleveland Baseball Club or the Cleveland Baseball Team. And, that's part of that is you don't want to have to rebrand twice. And that makes a lot of sense in some ways. But then it's really sort of a questionable move for, well, if you're making this move based on being sensitive to the folks who have wanted this name change for, more than 4 decades now, why can't you just stop right now and change the name from the Indians to something else? I think there's a lot of confusion about that, but it's left to the team to sort of decide how to go from here. And they have agreements, or they have had conversations with the Native American groups and the stakeholders in that regard, and they've pretty much gotten the okay to go ahead and take that route and play as the Indians in 2021. And hopefully by this time next year, we will know what the new name of the franchise will be moving forward beyond next season.
The one thing that appears to be somewhat of a strength is the pitching staff. Still a young pitching staff. You have Bieber, Carrasco, Plesac, Savale, Tristan McKenzie. You got a couple of guys that came over from the Padres that look intriguing in that Clevenger deal. But having said that, last year might have been an aberration because they played basically the AL Central. We saw in the playoffs that wasn't a great division to be playing all your games against as far as getting a true litmus test. Having said that, Shane Bieber was really good early in the year.
Right. Shane Bieber, obviously a unanimous Cy Young winner. You can't get much better than the effort that he put forth, especially over his first, 7 to 8 starts towards the end of the year. Towards the end of the 60-game season, the thing sort of tailed off a little bit. And obviously the playoff start against the Yankees, that was unlike anything we had seen out of Bieber all year. But there is a lot of hope. If you look at the rest of the rotation, how it lines up behind him, either if you've got Carrasco, then you've got a guy who could give you 200 innings in a season and 200 strikeouts. You've got Zach Plesac and Aaron Savale. I think out of any of those young guys, Aaron Savale might be positioned to step forward in 2021 and just go full-on Corey Kluber 2015. 2014, 2015, the progression that he made as a young pitcher back then, a lot of folks around the team say that Aaron Savale is set up for that kind of next step. And then really exciting to see Tristan McKenzie and the debut that he had last year. Looks like he, even though he missed almost 2 seasons worth of pitching beforehand, that he's got things figured out. He can be an effective major league pitcher. And, it'll be neat to see if we can get, maybe 15 to 20 starts out of Tristan McKenzie over the next season, just to see what he can do. Cal Cuantro, one of those pickups in the Mike Clevenger deal, he's going to pitch innings for this team next season. He's going to pitch likely out of the bullpen at the start of the year, but I would not be surprised to see him start a significant number of games in that rotation next year.
Well, the one thing about the Indians is they've shown they can identify and develop young pitching. The question is, and the big need now is let's find some outfield bats and some guys that you can plug into that lineup, because you look at their system. Number one, they're not going to be able to go out and sign any free agents. If you're shedding money through trading Lindor and potentially Carrasco, you're just not going to sign free agents. And there isn't anybody that jumps out in that system. I know there's Nolan Jones, but he's probably still a full year away from where you'd like him to be. There's nobody that comes to mind that you're going to plug in and say, hey, this guy's going to help our offense significantly.
Right. You bring up Nolan Jones, their number one prospect. He spent the fall instructional league out in Arizona, playing a variety of positions, not just third base, because they got a pretty good one there in Jose Ramirez, MVP finalist 3 out of the last 4 years. Nolan Jones is going to have some positional flexibility if he wants to play in the majors in 2021. That means trying out at first base, trying out in the outfield, maybe right field or left field. That's what he did out in Arizona in the fall. The bat is there. The ability to get on base and walk is there. We saw flashes of that during the summer training camp in Cleveland when he was here. But Nolan Jones, don't expect to see him. If you're going to see him in 2021, it's not going to be until mid to late May in Cleveland, because Terry Francona does not like to bring rookies straight from Arizona to the cold spring months at Progressive Field. As far as finding a bat out there, you're going to see a lot of the Domingo Santana types. Take a flyer on a guy for a minor league contract or a major league minimum deal, and see if he works out. Much like you did Hanley Ramirez, other guys just trying to inject some, sort of pop into the lineup in some way.
Well, and Joe, to go along with that, a positive in that thought is there are a lot of guys that will be willing to come to the Indians to play because they want to play for Terry Francona. Now the question is, how do you hit on those darts that you have to throw with those guys?
You're really trying to catch lightning in a bottle, sort of thread the needle with that. You got Rajay Davis to come in and produce a few years ago. You got Mike Napoli to come in and produce that way. So those veteran guys who buy into Terry Francona's philosophy and want to come here and not just be a good clubhouse guy just to bring along the younger talent that they have, but also aren't really hurting you in the lineup with 130 strikeouts in a season or whatever. So it's tough to find those guys, and the Indians always seem to manage to sort of line up a few guys to try and do that each year. It's the way they have to operate within the economics that they have.
Yeah, unfortunately this year they're looking for 3 or 4 of them. When you look at this team, I feel good about Terry Francona. I just think they may be asking him to make lemonade with some rocks this year.
Right. It's going to be a matter of guys who are early on in their major league careers, guys like Jake Bauers, guys like Josh Naylor, who are going to have extraordinary seasons if this Indians team in 2021 is going to be expected to contend. If you look, you're going to be looking up at the Minnesotas and the White Sox. Even Detroit got better with A.J. Hinch this year. Kansas City even got better. So it could be a long season if guys like Bauers, like Naylor, even a Bobby Bradley, if he gets a shot, if those guys don't produce. And Oscar Mercado needs to do something in center field. That right there is where it's going to be most important to see improvement with these Indians.
As always, Joe Noga, Indians beat reporter here on cleveland.com, as well as in the pages of the Plain Dealer. Appreciate the time and the insight as we wrap up our year in review for 2020. Well, that'll do it for this special edition of the Weekend Winners, a year in review. Remember, Les Levine back in the chair Monday from 6 to 7. Have a great weekend, have great holidays, and we will see you again next week.